So as our states continue to face these budget deficits, I think people in Olympia and across the state are really frustrated. They are tired of having to work with these holes in our budget. But I also see it as an opportunity for us to really look at how we're spending money and to really look at the programs that are being successful. And especially important for communities to weigh in and to tell us what they need and what they want. And specifically for our BIPOC orgs and communities, this is an opportunity for them to weigh in on what they most need and what programs are working best for them.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, the third installment of a three-part series on our 2026 state, county, and city policy. We'll chat with Nancy Liu, United Way Public Policy Coordinator, and Amanda Sandoval, United Way's Director of Systems Change and Public Policy, on topics such as takeaways from this year's state legislative session, updates on city and county policies, and an upcoming United Way staff visit to Washington, D.C. to meet with our federal lawmakers from Washington State. We'll also offer one last reminder about this year's free tax preparation campaign for those who still have time to file, and we'll discuss a local volunteer opportunity. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. Brigham Young psychology professor Phil Daniels is credited for creating the business framework model called Start, Stop, and Continue. The model provides a method of reflecting on past programs or projects and deciding whether new strategies need to be implemented, which current efforts need to cease altogether, and what is working so well that it should be maintained. It seems like every year the Washington State Legislature has employed Start, Stop, and Continue to crafting policies at mid-budget deficits. Each year prior to session, they foreshadow making tough funding decisions amid revenue shortfalls. They field comments from those who insist that a particular program, initiative, or project is too important to cut, or that the launch of a new program that would benefit thousands is long overdue, or that money is being wasted on an initiative that for years has not fielded ample results. This year, after 2 months of discourse and debate within their chambers, our state reps made tough decisions on issues such as housing, education, utilities, food, and taxation. It's safe to say that not all Washingtonians are pleased with the legislature's decisions. The same is true at the city and county level, because like our state legislature, local lawmakers have had to make hard choices amid budget shortfalls. At United Way of King County, we work with community leaders, local nonprofits, and the public and private sector to ensure that everyone in our community has enough to eat, a safe place to call home, educational opportunities, and financial stability. And we also advocate for policies that address the drivers of systemic inequities, while encouraging all lawmakers at every level of government to invest in proven programs and initiatives that serve our most vulnerable neighbors. We are dedicated to keeping you informed about issues and policies that guide our advocacy work. This episode of Hourglass is the third installment of a three-part series on 2026 state, county, and city policy. The first episode focused on the state legislature, namely the governor's budget and expectations around this year's legislative session. The second episode covered the city of Seattle and King County governments, both of which gained new leaders from last year's election. For this episode, we'll review the recently ended legislative session from a start, stop, and continue lens. Which bills passed? Which failed? Which programs survived amid budget cuts? Which ones didn't? And how did United Way supported policies fare? At the city and county level, we'll provide updates on how our newly elected lawmakers are addressing issues such as housing and food insecurity. And what does it mean to have yet another year of policymaking at the local and state levels amid budget shortfalls and no relief in sight? Amanda Sandoval, United Way's Director of Systems Change and Public Policy, who led discussions in the first two episodes, is back and joined by Nancy Liu, United Way Public Policy Coordinator. Hourglass sat down with Nancy and Amanda in early April following the end of legislative session. In addition to talking about the governance within our state, the two will also discuss an upcoming United Way staff visit to Washington, D.C. to meet with our federal lawmakers. With this episode, we begin with Nancy, who will look back on this year's legislative session.
As of now, Governor Ferguson has signed any bills with the deadline being April 4th. We had several of our bills both on our agenda and as well as our support that have been passed and signed as of the deadline. And just as a reminder, this session was a supplemental budget year, so it was only 60 days, so it was a pretty quick turnaround to get all these bills through the state legislature, both on the House and Senate side. Though it was a tough year, both at the state level and the federal level, we did have some wins.
Okay. So what has been signed into law as of the first week of April?
Yeah. So just as a reminder of our three guiding pillars, which is advancing economic mobility, promoting housing stability, and interrupting the school-to-prison pipeline, 17 of our bills have been passed through the legislators, both on our support and lead agenda, and have been signed by Governor Ferguson.
Okay. And what were some of those bills?
So let me do a breakdown. So under the advancing economic mobility, 5 of our bills were signed into law. Under the promoting and housing stability, 3 were passed and signed into law. And then for the interrupting the school to prison pipeline, 4 were signed into law. And then just to share a little bit about some of the bills that we've worked on.
Sure.
So some of the ones that we have worked on either with community partners or that we've led, House Bill 2523, which is concerning the Community Reinvestment Program, that was signed into law. And we know that this is something that's really important to communities that have been targeted by the war on drugs back in the 80s. And it's reinvesting in those communities. Another bill that we've championed or worked alongside with partners is House Bill 2238 concerning the statewide food security. So part of this legislation includes directing the Washington State Department of Agriculture to develop a statewide food security strategy, which again is a response, I believe, to the federal administration's cuts to food programs. And last but not least, Senate Bill 5963, which is a post-secondary basic needs coalition bill. And Emily, who is the manager for that coalition, worked alongside the Washington State Board of Community and Technical College to modify the bill that provides funding for the Passport to Careers programs and expands eligibility for those that are income eligible for the Washington College Grant.
Great. Now, what were some surprising takeaways from this session?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the surprising takeaways was the passage of isolation and restraint. Last year, that was a bill that we supported alongside community partners, and that didn't make it through. So it was really exciting to see that that was one of the surprising takeaways that did get passed and that our partners did champion to make it across the finish line. There was a bill around tax property relief for senior citizens. We know that senior citizens are a vulnerable population. They are on fixed income, so providing tax relief on property taxes that they could no longer afford if they were working. So that was a surprising takeaway, supporting senior citizens with that kind of like financial assistance and providing stability for them.
Another big one that there was some back and forth about across party lines was the removing a tax exemption for data centers here in Washington State. There was actually 2 data tax exemption bills this session. One passed, and so that eliminates the tax break for these data centers, and it's estimated to bring in $63 million for this current budget or throughout the rest of this biennium. And in the next 2 years, it's estimated to bring in $140 million. And this is one thing that Democrats have worked on in order to kind of help fill some of the gap in the budget. Although I do think this will continue to be an argument in future sessions, especially since there's another tax exemption that we anticipate will come back next legislative session, and when there's a longer session to be able to have these arguments. Another big surprising takeaway this year, and the cause of a lot of conversation, has been the millionaire's tax, which we now know has passed through the legislature. And just as a reminder, this is a proposal that would insert a 9.9% tax on any annual income above $1 million. And this is specific incoming revenue. This isn't stocks or property or things of that nature. It's just income. And anything under 1 million is not taxed. So you have to go over that 1 million threshold. And this would impact less than 1% of the wealthiest households in Washington state. And early projections approximate about $3.7 billion annually. Proposed use of the revenue would go towards things like healthcare, public education, early learning, and some specific tax breaks for Washington state, the Washington Working Families Tax Program. This was a little surprising because there was some back and forth within the party. And last year, the governor had said he wouldn't support it. And even in the beginning of session this year, I think he was a little bit wary. But as session continued on, he did publicly come out and say he would support it. And this bill went through several iterations and edits and really ended up passing in a very different way than it was originally written. And so even though it passed, the fight is just starting to see if it will remain. So it's going to go to the Supreme Court, Washington State Supreme Court, to see if it is in fact legal. And or alongside that, it's going to be a ballot measure in this year's November ballot. Some proponents just say to wait and let the courts battle it out. And others are pro having it go in the ballot. And so it's kind of taking this two-pronged approach and going to the courts and also going to the people. And so we'll see if it ends up staying legal in the time to come.
Okay, which bills that United Way supported didn't pass through this session but have the possibility of being reintroduced in next year's legislative session?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So as I previously mentioned in the surprise takeaway, isolation and restraint was one of them. So I'm just going to base it off of that example. Oftentimes, bills are reintroduced in the next session. Advocates work with legislators, lobbyists, and community members to make adjustments for a more viable pathway for it to become a bill, hence, the one on isolation and restraint. Some of the ones that we've kind of partnered with are Senate Bill 5961, so transferring the Imagination Library Program to the Department of Children, Youth, and Families to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. So that's also known as the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. Another one would be increasing student access to free meals served in public schools. So we are a champion of getting free school meals across King County. So that's something that is a huge concern for our communities across Washington. And so we might see that coming back next year. Something also that we're not closely following, but it is changing the landscape of how we interact with artificial intelligence. But this made it pretty far through the state legislature, which is Senate Bill 5956, which is addressing artificial intelligence, student discipline, and surveillancing in public schools. So I'm very curious to see how that might play out next year.
And we're talking about a budget win for our community partner.
Yeah, so before I pass it off for Amanda to do a deeper dive on the budget, I just wanted to share one budget item that was passed or celebrated by our partners at Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. They have secured full funding of $25 million to continue support services through the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services Office of Refugee and Immigrant Assistance. For another year. It's a project that they've been working on previously, and so it's so great to hear that they've secured full funding for this project.
Passing on to Amanda, how does the budget look?
Yes, it was, so if you'll remember, a supplemental budget years means that we just make small adjustments to the previous legislative session's budget. And so last year, we passed a $77.8 billion 2-year or biennium budget. And so this year, we made small adjustments for it to total $79.4 for the operating budget. And I will say this was passed without any Republican votes. Democrats in the House and Senate were able to approve it without any Republican votes. And so there's some good things and there's some things that we're a little wary about. So some cuts include $143 million cut from the Working Connections Child Care Program, cuts $27 million from the transition to kindergarten program, which we anticipate is a reduction of 7,266 slots across the state. It transfers $880 million from our state's rainy day fund to the state general fund in order to help close some of those budget deficits. And I will just note, this one had been argued a lot throughout legislative session. Some fiscal conservatives don't agree with moving this much out of the rainy day fund. They wanted to have more in that fund in case we see more federal cuts or other things pop up. And others said, it's raining, it's pouring. Like, this is the time to move that money. And so we saw that really be battled out throughout session. We also saw the budget deposit $394.6 million of the capital gains revenue into, again, the general fund, rather than that going to the school construction account, which is what part of that funding from the capital gains account was supposed to go to. Again, really trying to fill this hole in our state budget. We also saw nearly $1 billion moved in the budget to pay for the state's legal liability. This is because of different things throughout state departments and having to pay legal fees and some lawsuits and things. And so every state is required to have a legal liability fund, and ours continues to rise just throughout different things that have happened in the past. Mm-hmm. We also saw them move $20 million to cover just under 1,200 seniors and people with disabilities who are going to lose Medicaid coverage, which is really great to see, but also we anticipate 30,000 people are going to lose Medicaid and Medicare coverage come October. And so good to see this $20 million, but also what are we going to do about the rest of these people in our state who are not going to have coverage? Again, we talked a little bit about the data centers and that tax break and how that's going to bring more money into the budget. And the operating budget also includes about $15 million to protect some continuum of care grantees who receive federal housing dollars, which, again, really great to see that $15 million, but the total gap is $40 million. And so I think through the budget, we really saw a lot of anticipating additional federal cuts and trying to fill some of that, but also having to really eliminate other programs just because, again, there isn't funding. And what the state left with and that we'll have to grapple with next year is we still have this large hole to fill. So next year, the first thing that they'll have to face is an $878 million budget deficit. And that's what we know. And we anticipate additional budget deficits because we don't know how much money the state is or is not going to get from the feds this next fiscal year. And so we're already starting next legislative session with a budget deficit. Now we shift to city and county local budgets who also have to grapple with backfilling programs that didn't get funded at the state level. And now the city and the county has to figure out which of those programs are they going to prioritize, or which communities are they going to prioritize backfilling at the local levels.
Speaking of the Fed, what's next for our systems change and policy team, particularly on the federal level?
Yeah, so we're going to have our Advocacy on the Hill Day, April 27th to the 29th. So some of our teams within the community services teams, as well as our engagement team and board members will be traveling to D.C. to advocate for our federal priorities. We'll be meeting with our two senators, Senator Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell, and 4 representatives, Representative Schreier, Delbene Smith, and Jaya Paul. Our federal priorities are protecting the VITA matching grant program, and VITA stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. And under that as well is maintaining the VITA funding. And then we're also going to be advocating for the Farm Bill, so advocating for the delay in shifts of SNAP admin costs on the states. And then what Amanda mentioned before, advocating for the continuum of care funds for our housing and rental assistance. So just general advocating around funding for housing. But yeah, I'll pass it back to Amanda to talk a little bit more about kind of our local advocacy.
Yes. And as Nancy mentioned, now that session is over, we're shifting to our federal work and also our local work with the city and the county. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that work goes towards protecting funding for our programs. So things like our free tax prep, our free school summer meals, our rental assistance dollars, and additional funding outside of that to really support our communities who continue to be hard hit through this administration. And I think we have our work cut out for us this year, especially because we have a new mayor, we have a new exec, we have new council members, new city AG, and we're continuing to have to react and respond to what's happening at the federal level.
Right.
I think one thing we've talked about a lot with partners and legislators and council members is every time there's a cut at the federal level, it's felt down all the way to local cities and counties because it's on them to fund programs that our communities rely on, and very basic needs program, food, housing, education. And so we already know the city and the county are also working from a budget deficit.
Right.
And so it's going to be even harder to get those dollars, and even more important to really make sure that we have those stories from community members and partner orgs to show the city and the county the impact that these programs have. So some of the things that we'll be working on is the FEP levy, which passed last year.
Right.
And so making sure that that funding is aligned with what community needs. And so working with partners to make sure that the strategies included in those dollars are what the community wants. The Best Start for Kids levy, it will be on next year's ballot in 2027. But again, county's already working on what that funding is going to go to, where are the needs. They're already assessing programs. And so making sure we're in at the beginning of those conversations is going to be really key to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck. And then this is a big midterm election year. And so our team may not directly doing get out the vote work, but we partner with other orgs and community partners to make sure that people understand just how important it is to vote, and also what's going to be on their ballot as we anticipate a lot of additional levies on this year's ballot. We saw recently that the King County exec announced the possibility of a King County-wide housing levy, which would go to the people. It would be on the ballot. There's also possibility of property taxes being raised. Again, something that would be on the ballot. And just really keeping on top of all of those things that are coming, and making sure community members are informed and understand impacts, and making sure that they know that they have a voice, and here are those touch points for them to engage.
Just one last question. So we've been doing this podcast for 2 years. All the podcasts that we've done with regard to public, state, federal policy have talked about deficits. In your time being down there, what is the general mood? What is the general atmosphere, morale, knowing that we had it last year, we have it this year, we may have it next year?
So as our states continue to face these budget deficits, I think people in Olympia and across the state are really frustrated. They are tired of having to work with these holes in our budget. But I also see it as an opportunity for us to really look at how we're spending money, and to really look at the programs that are being successful. And especially important for communities to weigh in and to tell us what they need and what they want. And specifically for our BIPOC orgs and communities, this is an opportunity for them to weigh in on what they most need and what programs are working best for them.
Amanda and Nancy, thank you so much for once again talking public policy on Hourglass. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
For more information about United Way of King County's public policy work, log on to uwkc.org, click on What We Do, and click on Advocacy. The regular April 15th tax filing deadline has passed, but if you live in King, Pierce, Snohomish, or Thurston County, you still have time to file without a penalty. That's because those local counties are among 17 across Washington state where residents still have until May 1st to file taxes due to last December's flooding. It also means you have time to see if you qualify for United Way of King County's free tax preparation campaign. United Way provides free tax prep for individual filers making less than $80,000 a year or less than $96,000 a year for non-single filers. During much of tax season, we offer free tax prep services at nearly 24 in-person sites throughout King County And we offer a virtual site. Some of those in-person sites are now closed following the regular tax deadline, but you can still get your taxes prepared for free virtually and in the following in-person locations: the Downtown Seattle Library, HopeLink Center in Bellevue, HopeLink Center in Shoreline, Westfield South Center Mall in Tukwila, and the Enumclaw Library. For more information, log on to myfreetaxeswa.org. World Relief Western Washington of Kent is looking for volunteers to work in its Paradise Parking Plots community garden. Paradise Parking Plots is a 2-acre garden that provides spaces for refugee, immigrant, and Kent residents to grow cultural foods and reconnect with the soil. World Relief will train volunteers to do tasks such as weeding its food forest, controlling pets and diseases, and taking part in construction projects. For more information, log on to worldrelief.org/western-WA and click on the Get Involved page. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by generous donations from people like you. Please send all comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglass@uwkc.org. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn via @UnitedWayKC. And to learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.